as opposed to something that was. They just wanted to mimic what they liked.
All right, another question?
This is kind of going back to something that was being discussed earlier, but if you had an opportunity to talk to the publishers, what would you say would drive people back into buying comics? Because we're getting to a point where the numbers keep dwindling, and if you look at the sales of Captain Marvel during World War II versus the sales of whatever the most popular comic is right now, we're dying on the vine.
I personally, and I don't know if the numbers actually support this, but I sort of pitch this idea whenever I go to DC. Personally, I think that the publishers and the executives in charge of the comic book companies should come to places like Metropolis and should step out of the world of comics into the world of mainstream American culture and mainstream world culture, and consider the possibility of writing stories and coming up with ideas for people other than the sort of insular comic book world. In other parts of the world, comic books are entirely mainstream. In France, the family goes on vacation at the close of school. Before going to the beach, everyone goes to the bookstore and they buy novels and graphic novels both. And there are graphic novels for mom and dad and little girls and, not just 14-year-old boys. So it really is possible for comics to appeal to everybody as they and regain the kind of audience that they had in the 40s. But I think you have to look at more than just the numbers of the very small market of comics themselves, and start to think the way television producers and movie executives do in terms of general audience appeal. And you have a wider variety of stories, a wider variety of characters, and more people coming in. My personal pet project would be to have different lines of DC comics, for instance, with so that people who read Superman in the 50s, for instance, could go and find their Superman. Mm-hmm. People who read Superman in the 40s or who just like that stuff in the 40s go and find their Superman. Either new stories and or reprints of the classic product, the iconic product that for instance, founded this festival. I think there are a lot of people who still like that stuff and would probably buy new product drawn and written on that model.
That's why New Frontier is so successful.
Yes.
That's...
Yeah, I would tell them, listen to these guys. Basically, I think they pretty much nailed it.
All right, we have another question.
Okay, I'm kind of taking it back to the Hollywood angle, but what do you guys think of the movie, the comic book, the movie, directed with
Mark Hamill's love letter to the comic book industry?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. Mark's a friend of mine, and I don't tell him that, but I haven't seen the film.
I'd love to see it. I was too busy drawing comics.
I think it's great. I think as a mockumentary, if you go in expecting like Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman or something like that, it's certainly not on par. But it's fun, you get to go to the San Diego Comic-Con for an hour and a half with Luke Skywalker, and the voice of the Animaniacs and SpongeBob SquarePants. It's a fun piece. My favorite moment in that whole movie, though, is when Kevin Smith talks about how he's reached the point where he reads comics and then he tears them in half because they've been read, so they're worth nothing now, so he may as well just throw them away.
All right. Another question?
You touched on earlier about how it's going back to the way it was before Crisis, because it seems like everyone, that's what they know, and it's more, the market is more geared towards people that have always read comics and don't casually read them. And you call it a snake eating its own tail. Do you feel as though the comic book market is growing or declining or just kind of simmering and just kind of staying stasis, because you guys are in the industry and you know better?
The numbers say that it's declining at the moment, isn't it?
I think the numbers are declining, but I also think the industry is evolving.
Right.
I mean, the difference, one of the reasons for all these trade paperbacks is it keeps the stories in print. As long as they sell out, they would print them. They stay in print in perpetuity.
What's Death of Superman on in its printing? John, do you know?
I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm not connected with the publishing end of it. But this way of publishing comics with trade paperbacks, and the television is moving this way too. I mean, I don't watch television week to week generally. I wait till the end of the season and Netflix it, or I download it off of iTunes, because you don't have to deal with ads, and you can watch a whole season in a week, and in the way that you'd read a novel, you just see the season of television. So that's like the trade paperback equivalent of television. It's kind of a new market paradigm for entertainment. And it does make it possible for classic story arcs and comics to be picked up a generation later, because they can always be in print and there are copies of them all around.
I really like how you said it's evolving, though. I think, and it jumps back a little bit to what you were saying, John, earlier about the different imprints and that kind of thing, and the culture of comics elsewhere. DC and Marvel both are expanding their imprints to different types. DC just has kicked off a manga imprint, because manga is the number one, Tokyo Pop's the number one selling comic company in the world, pretty much. And so they are tying into those kinds of things. Marvel just has started what Paul Levitz called recently the future of comics, which is an imprint adapting novels, prose fiction into comic form, and it's called the DeBell Brothers imprint. I've done some work for them, and they've had huge success by adapting the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series of novels. It's been selling hundreds of thousands of copies of that series. So, is the snake eating its own tail? Maybe in tights and capes, but in other imprints, we are seeing an evolution.
Started through that.
And seeing an increase.
All right, another question?
I was wondering if comic books would go back to one-story comic books, or are they continuing issue to issue?
Almost certainly not.
But I do think that as part of what we were just talking about, as a way to appeal to different sectors of the market, that doing more done-in-one stories, having more places where new readers can jump on, would be a good idea.
Actually, let me amend that for a second. In the regular books, almost certainly not. But I think in the younger reader books, in the Marvel Adventures series, in the DC, Johnny DC line, almost all the stories are done at once. And they're just as well told, frankly, as the stories for the adulter books.
Well, and you'll occasionally find them when a creative team's shifting. You'll have a fill-in issue of a done-in-one. You have somebody writing 6 here and 6 here, but in between, somebody will come in and just tell the one story that they want to tell. But I also think with the expansion in comics of being multi-book tie-ins and cross-universe storytelling, you might have a greater chance of having some done-in-ones as tie-ins to greater events, to bigger events. You might pick up an issue of Action Comics that stands alone, but also is a part of a bigger.
Well, they actually do those.
Yeah.
Kurt occasionally tries to sneak them in with that.
Right.
Okay, we've got another question, but before we get to that, one quick one on my end. You guys talk about the one runs and how everything is now going to bigger and better things. You look at Marvel with what they recently did with Civil War, and how comic books pre-crisis used to be escapism for the most part, while Marvel's Civil War was pretty much boiled down a lot more to what's going on in our society today. Do you think that was a